By bringing buried soil organic carbon to the surface through accelerated tilling, the rate of decomposition and carbon dioxide exhalation puts more carbon into the atmosphere. So what is this carbon sequestration? Atmospheric carbon levels can be lowered through our growing practices. The soil's capacity to sequester carbon is determined by plant root depth and plant photosynthetic rate. Soil organic matter is the surface carbon, which is eventually decomposes, which is good for the soil food web and is really needed, but it leads to the formation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So we need both. Humus, on the other hand, is formed by soil microbes within soil aggregates from sugars channeled to the soil via the hyphae of mycorrhizal fungi living in association with actively growing green plants. Once formed, humus is an inseparable part of the soil matrix. It can be very long-lived, as in hundreds of years. Hence, it fulfills the requirements of safely removing excess CO2 from the atmosphere and storing it in the soil. Carbon is sequestered at greater depth than in silt systems. Extended reproduction along with the increased soil macro and microbiological life sequesters the carbon deeper in the soil. At the end, I'll have a resource list. A lot of this science has been coming out in the last 10 years. It's phenomenal stuff. Dr. Christine Jones, Elaine Ingham have both been guests at NOFA conferences and just phenomenal minds working on these issues. A lot of information is coming out of Rodale too, so check it out at the end and learn more on your own. So what are some of these benefits? Every 27 tons of carbon sequestered biologically in the soil represents 100 tons of carbon dioxide removed from the atmosphere. As a bonus, it creates healthy soil, which in turn produces healthier food. Crops and animals raised on healthy soil have a higher nutrient value, and they taste better too and have a longer shelf life. It's a win-win for us and for the planet. So this is a soil profile off the internet, and you can see there's a green above ground, and then there's a thin layer of this organic matter that's the area where it is given back to the atmosphere easily. And then the deeper you go into the soil is where the carbon is sequestered long term. And you can see in this soil there's great aggregates, these little clumpy things, and the roots go deep, and there's worms and all kinds of microbes and good creatures that we'll be talking about. So photosynthesis, yeah, 3rd, 4th grade, what was it? I learned that simple process, but there's a whole lot more going on than I used to think, or probably many people thought until a lot of science is happening. So photosynthesis is the process by which plants use the energy from the sunlight to produce glucose, sugar, from carbon dioxide and water. Some of the sugars are used for growth, and some, up to 60%, are exuded into the soil by plant roots to support the microbes involved in nutrient acquisition, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Plant roots exude a vast array of chemical substances, all based on carbon, and these do things like signal microbes and communicate to other plants. The flow of liquid carbon to soil is the primary pathway by which new topsoil is formed. Somewhere between 85 and 90% of the nutrients plants require for healthy growth are acquired via this carbon exchange, where plant root exudates provide energy to microbes, which in turn supply needed minerals and trace elements otherwise unavailable for plant use. So why would a plant give up 60% or so of its food back into the soil to somebody? There must be a reason, so let's hold that thought. It's just another picture of really healthy soil covered by living plants. All those plants are photosynthesizing, dumping 40 to 60% of their sugars and other oxidates into the soil. And why are they doing that? So sorry, it doesn't have the green on top in color, but you can see on the right, these plants are bigger. There's more green to it, and so if you look below the surface, there's much more root structure and root mass that go way deeper. And these guys over here that have a shorter green on top aren't producing as much roots, and these roots are exuding all of those sugars into the soil where the soil biology is making use of it. So let's talk about those soil microorganisms. A teaspoon of healthy soil contains billions of these microorganisms. Most common are bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, and arthropods. Without these microbes, we wouldn't eat. I don't think we'd exist either. They play a key role in soil fertility by recycling nutrients and making them bioavailable. In other words, making them available to the growing plants. Most microbes need organic carbon to live. They get this from eating wood chips, leaves, manures, and other decomposing organic material in the soil. They also get carbon from the rhizosphere, which is the area immediately surrounding plant roots. And because roots give off substances, root exudates, like sugars and amino acids that the microbes can use. Then, some of these exudates go back into the forms that plants can use, such as minerals, vitamins, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, phosphorus, potassium, amino acids, and trace minerals. So back to that question, why are the plants that we're growing because we want these vegetables, why are they giving up so much of their nutrients back to the soil? They're doing it to help these creatures that live in the soil, these microorganisms, flourish. And why? Why do we want that to happen? Among the first organisms to begin decomposing residues in the soil are bacteria. And they perform important services related to water dynamics and nutrient cycling, disease suppression. They synthesize hormones, they fix nitrogen, they produce fungicides and antibiotics for plants on demand. Some affect water movement by producing substances like glomalin, and they help bind soil particles into small aggregates. They convert energy in the soil organic matter into forms to the rest of the organism in the food web. Plants by increasing nutrient availability. So they convert energy in the soil organic matter into forms useful to the rest of the organisms in the soil food web. So they're benefiting nutrient availability to everybody. They help with nitrogen fixation. Some types of bacteria are able to take nitrogen gas from the atmosphere and convert it into a form that plants can use. Bacteria need foods rich in nitrogen, like green manures and legume residues. So a fertilizer rich in nitrogen therefore favors the bacterial community, and a bacterial community is more abundant in a tilled soil. So the next big group that we want to talk about and work with are fungi. So I'm going to just have you look at the picture first before I start talking. I think it looks to me like a pine seedling, and again, this is a really it's off the internet, and it's used in all of the presentations I've seen because it's such a phenomenal photo. But you might look at it and think the whole thing below the soil is roots. They are not the roots. The roots are these kind of orangish, darker colored structures. The rest of this is all fungal mycelium. So keep that in mind as we talk about what these fungal mycelium do. They dominate most of the soils in the temperate climate, which is where we live. They're the most predominant in cellulose They are the predominant cellulose decomposers, and they flourish with high carbon-nitrogen ratio. They derive their carbon and energy requirements from the breakdown of dead and decaying plant cell walls, cellulose and lignin. They have a symbiotic relationship with most plants, not the brassicas. They don't hurt the brassicas, but they don't have this relationship that helps the plants take up water and nutrients and improves nitrogen fixation by legumes. These mycelium are a vast transportation system. The roots have lots of mycorrhizae. Plant roots that have a lot of mycorrhizae are better able to resist fungal disease, parasitic nematodes, drought, salinity, and aluminum toxicity. The vast communication network helps form and stabilize soil aggregates, and it is more abundant in an untilled soil. So again, look at this. So if this plant, as all green plants, are exuding 40 to 60% of their sugars and other nutrients into the soil, and it's feeding the fungal and bacterial and other microbiologicals in the soil, it also is this communication and transport network. So the plant can say it really needs some phosphorus in a bioavailable form, and that goes out on this communication system, and the fungal mycelium find it and bring it back to the plant as needed. So this is a great picture of, first saw it, I thought it was all roots. They are not roots. The root is this growing tip right here, and the strands and filaments are mycorrhizae from the fungus. So these hyphae extending from roots increase the plant's ability to obtain nutrients and water. So we're not just depending on the roots. The absorptive area is approximately 10 times more efficient than that of the root hairs and about 100 times more efficient than that of roots. Hyphae have a tubular vacuole system that allows biodirectional flow. So sugars from the host plant and nutrients from the soil can move rapidly and simultaneously in opposite directions. I find that totally amazing. So it can send out, the plant can send out the symbol, hey, I need some phosphorus. It goes out. At the same time that communication is going out, coming back simultaneously is what's needed pretty much. Okie dokie. Glomalin. It was discovered in 1996 by Sarah Wright. It's a glycoprotein produced by mycorrhizal fungi in a heavily stable form of soil carbon. So we haven't known about this long, and we don't know everything about it, but we do know that it's a soil glue that binds soil particles together, building and stabilizing aggregates. And aggregates are really important in allowing air and moisture to penetrate and go through the soil. The aggregates are also little micro protected zones where microorganisms can function without being attacked by others, and have a stable environment. It gives the soil its tilth and texture, stores carbon and nitrogen, and it accounts for 27% of the carbon in soil, and it's a major component of organic matter. It lasts over 40 years. Some researchers have said over 100. Take your pick. It improves water storage capacity. So we're going to be talking about glomalin a lot. This is a picture that we'll bring up again later from some soil early in the spring that I pulled up some roots in my garden. And I scraped off, this is all soil attached to the roots, and I scraped off some along the bottom of this to show what a root is like. So healthy soil, when you pull up a plant, it's not just the roots, it has the soil attached through the glue. Okay, so there's two ways that I'm going to be talking about that help make healthy soil, and one is the no-till, and the other is the cover crops. So let's talk about no-till, and here's my fancy little layer cake. I always talk about soil as being, I view it as a layer cake that everybody has their own little layer of environment that they are happiest in and can function best. So as humans, we're up there on the frosting because we live above the soil line. Um, if we're buried in the soil, we don't do very well. So each one of these, type of layers all the way down through the soil have microorganisms and life, biological life that functions best in that environment at that level. Back to this picture of the soil profile again. So you can see, you can't really see, but each of these levels, as you go down, looking down lower into the soil, have different creatures that are happy in those places. So what happens when you till? That whole system gets chopped to smithereens. It's like a tornado coming through a human community. You may be killed or maimed, your house and community buildings destroyed, transportation and communication systems just disrupted, and it takes a long time to rebuild. You might get temporary housing and medical help, but it takes a long time to rebuild that infrastructure, to have your homes back and your communication and transport system. So if we think of our soil, we want to keep it so those things are functioning all the time and they don't have to start and repair themselves and rebuild. So no-till. So the benefits of no-till, doesn't disrupt the soil profile. It improves the texture and increases water retention, slows the breakdown of organic matter. It results in a slow, steady release of nutrients, just what the plants need, a slow, steady release. Creates beneficial environments for soil organisms like earthworms and those bacteria and fungals. There's weed suppression. There's weed seeds that can live in our soil for pretty much forever, deep down, and when they're brought to the surface every time you till, then they sprout because they're in an environment that's good for their growing conditions. So if you don't till, they just stay buried. Erosion control and water retention, prevents nutrient leaching, and also carbon sequestration, exposes less organic matter to the surface, and therefore it stays buried where we want it. How do we do this? How do we, as no-till people, make our gardens, which some of us maybe have been tilling for many years? What are those techniques that can help us? So solarization is one, which is trapping the sun's radiant energy to kill unwanted vegetation, especially newly germinated and sprouted weed seeds or cover crop or whatever. So you spread a piece of clear, lightweight plastic over the bed and secure the edges, weight them down. And it has to be on a nice sunny day. And after 24 hours, 48 maximum, because you don't want to kill your soil life, it should have just about fried all of those baby tender green things that have sprouted. Another method is occultation, which is preventing the sun's rays from hitting the soil. So you're trapping the warmth and the moisture and encouraging those weed seeds to germinate and sprout into an unfriendly environment where they just die and become food. So you cover the bed with an opaque barrier like a tarp or black plastic or cardboard. You weigh it down. You leave it covered from 3 to 6 weeks or as long as it takes. I've left some places where I've had really major perennial weeds for a year. When I pull it back, the worms have been phenomenal under there, and it's really healthy soil. It's just takes longer. And another method is the lasagna method. Okay, so this photo is from, again, I lifted it from the web, so I have never done anything that impressively. My lasagna is always just 2 or 3 layers or 4 layers of material. It's a way of creating new garden beds without turning or preparing the soil. You lay down large pieces of cardboard, and then you make sure they overlap, and then you add layers of organic matter like rotted hay, shredded leaves, manure, or compost. And you top it off with either wood chips or straw, something to keep it from drying out. And you keep it watered, you want it moist but not sopping wet, and it will really create fantastic soil, be full of worms, worm castings, and other microorganisms. You can wait 6 months and plant directly into it, or you can make little planting holes, fill it with compost or topsoil, and plant sooner. This is how all of the soil my farm has been, co-created by doing, like I said, we cut the trees at soil level and built up from there with probably about a foot total, maybe a little bit more of wood chips and manure. That's what I had access to at the time. And now, 35 years later, we had really good soil. I was planting in it. I did it in the fall, and I was planting in it in the spring. And we also add mulch pretty much every year on top, because mulch also helps keep the soil covered and suppresses weeds. Use those same biodegradable materials we've been using all the way along: rotted hay, straw, wood chips, and stuff. And it allows for moisture to penetrate, but it keeps the moisture from evaporating. It suppresses your weeds, and again, helps with erosion. Soil temperatures, maybe in the spring you want to pull it back so that the soil can heat up so you can plant sooner. But in the middle of August, having a mulch on there will cool off the soil considerably. And as it's constantly decomposing, it's feeding your soil microbes and worms, and it's becoming soil. So that's why every year we add mulch on top of where I started, and why the soil is so thick after all this time, so deep. So what kind of tools do we use to do this work? Use a broad fork. When I bought this thing in late 70s, it's called a double digger. It's got maybe 10, 12-inch long prongs, and you step on that bar and push it into the soil and rock the handles back and forth, so it keeps your soil structure intact and keeps your layer cake. Saves your back because you're not bending and you're not turning the soil at all. Over time, I need to use it less and less because the soil has just become so healthy on its own. If you don't have a broad fork, use your garden fork. Just remember not to turn the soil. Okay, excuse me a minute. Losing my voice. So, cover crops and green manures. This is my second tool, my two-pronged approach: the no-till and the green cover crops. So a cover crop is growing any kind of a crop that's a grass, small grain, or legume, primarily for seasonal soil protection and soil improvement. As cover crops grow, they become reservoirs for important plant nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium, as well as micronutrients. Now, green manure is a herbaceous planting. It could be the same planting that you use for your cover crops, but it's used as a fertilizer crop, grown and then intentionally plowed under while green to enrich the soil. But hey, we're not plowing under, are we? We're doing no-till. So if you want a green manure, if you want to hit a fertilizer in your soil, you let your cover crop grow up to about 4 inches, and then you can cut it and then solarize it. Just don't turn it under. It's a big nitrogen boost. And if you let it go it stabilizes through microbial digestion, stabilizes the soil, the nutrients in the soil. And that really best to wait 2 weeks before you plant into it, because the high nitrogen can often burn vegetables as you put them in. Cover crops, on the other hand, are a longer-term soil improvement. So you wait to cut them until they're much older, until their seed is about set, but not mature, unless you want them to self-seed, which I do sometimes because it saves me work. It's replanting itself. It's a great, you can cut it when it's at about 2 inches to 4 inches from the soil, and cut the rest of the plants off, and they will regrow, and therefore giving you some biomass for your compost or for mulch. The longer you let it grow, the larger the root mass, and so the more liquid carbon, those exudates are dumped into soil. If you keep it short, you're getting the biomass off, but you're getting less carbon sequestration. So what are the benefits of using cover crops? Pretty much the same as the no-till. It improves your texture, your water retention, microbial booster and nutrient enhancer, improves the soil structure, makes roots make air and water pathways, increases fungal growth, which increases glomalin production, and enhances your crumb and building soil aggregate. It too suppresses weeds by smothering them. Good for erosion control. Like I said, biomass producer. You can use them as living mulch and great pest and disease control. And again, carbon sequestration. The longer you let them grow, the more they're putting down deep into the soil. If you notice this is a tool that I'll be talking about later. I'm cutting an early cover crop that I planted in April. Here it is, June 29th. I'm cutting it. Look at the soil crumb. I mean, these are like worm castings and just incredibly rich, amazing soil. Photo on the left, just to show that, you know, you can have a larger root mass below soil than above. And the one on the right, I really like because the white, the big long white root system is from some kind of plant that was cut off either at soil level or just below soil level. And as it decomposes, it makes fantastic air and water pathways to get deep into the soil. It also, this plant is taking advantage of it and growing in its tunnels. As it decomposes deep in the soil, it becomes food for all the microorganisms, helping keep the biology going. A big taproot like this is helping to break up any compaction that might have been in the soil. So I've been doing this no pulling of plants out of my garden soil for eons. And someone asked me recently, well, what made you start doing that? And it was because I never got around at one point early on to do my garden cleanup fully in the fall. And so in the spring, I was pulling out, I think it was a brassica plant that I hadn't done last fall. And it was just the roots that were left anyway, were just covered with earthworms. It made me think, all winter long, they've been in the ground and people have been using them for whatever they needed it for. And why am I pulling these out? And so I began cutting them. And if you cut any plant right at the soil level or just below, well, it's not going to kill your dandelion, but for the most part, it'll kill your plant. So we use them in the garden, cover crops, anywhere there's bare soil. You know, even if it's just a small patch, I'll throw a handful down at any stage of the summer, spring, summer, or fall in the garden. I have about a quarter of the garden now out of production and is just in cover crops all season long. And you can use them in succession when you pull out your whatever vegetables, not pull out, excuse me, when you cut off your vegetables and your lettuce is all gone, throw in some cover crops. This is just to show you, this is a tomato, October 11th last year, and it was over 6 feet tall. You can look at it's green from the soil up to the top. It's loaded with fruit, and this is the kind of vegetable that can be grown on this kind of soil. There's no early blight or even late blight, but usually you'll see a lot of tomato plants are, by this time of the year, they're yellow at least halfway up. So this is what we all have to look forward to as we save the planet. So types of cover crops that are useful for small scale growers like us using hand tools. I'm going to go over each of these things individually as we go through, so I'm not going to read this all right now. You can go back to it. This will be on the NOFA site. but I want to say that I'm not a lazy grower, but I like to have as much work done for me as possible. So when I pick the cover crops that I'm going to use, all of them except clover are killed by a heavy duty winter of several 20-degree frosts. And that means I don't have to worry about going out in the spring and making sure I get my plastic on to do the solarization or occultation before it get, they get out of hand if it was a perennial um, cover crop. So the first one that I want to talk about is oat and field peas. They're just amazing. You can get them in the ground really, really early throughout the summer. They're great, again, as weed suppression. All of these things are great for weed suppression, for biomass, since I'm not going to read it for each one, I'm just going to show you about them. Handful of seed. So again, somebody helping me out here early in the spring when you get those frost heaves, you go out in the garden, you see a piece of bare soil that has crystalline where the water has frozen in the soil and pushed up the soil to make these little heavy things. Throw the seeds down, and then as it thaws and melts over the next few days, it will bury it for you. The other way that I do seed is I broadcast through the mulch. So when I say broadcast, I'm not planting 10 acres, so it's more like sprinkling the seeds on top of the soil or on top of the mulch. In this case, the mulch, I just use the rake to shuffle them in so that the seeds get down to be in contact with the soil. Anyway, this was on bare soil, and it was spring, so the soil is cold and it takes longer to germinate. If you planted these in June, they wouldn't have taken 9 days for them to come up. It's mostly oats and field peas. So notice the stake, it's about 3 feet tall, and it'll be in the next few photos just to show you some growth rate of the oats and peas. After 2 weeks, it's 12 feet tall. I'm 12 inches tall. I wish it was 12 feet tall. And here it is at 7 weeks. It's beginning to mature. It's over the top of that stake, so it's over 3 feet tall. And they're drying up, and I'm letting this go to seed, and it will self-seed in the bed itself. So here's back where I I seeded through the mulch. It came up kind of sparse, but that was okay because this was in April when I put the seeds in, and it's in a bed that I'm not going to be planting anything in. So I'm going to be planting transplants of winter squash. I do this with tomatoes, anything I'm transplanting out later in the season. Instead of having that bed sit there, not doing anything that whole time, these have been growing and photosynthesizing, exuding into the soil, and making the soil healthier while I waited for the time to be able to plant my June 1st transplants. So what I did was I just crimped those green things by bending them over. I think I used a board. You could use a pipe or your hands to kind of just squash them down, and it slows them down, knocks them out, doesn't quite kill them. So they're still doing a little photosynthesis. Anyway, in July, the winter squash is doing great. At the end of July, there was no competition with this cover crop through the season. I got really great squash from it. Another way to do cover cropping is to undersow under a taller crop in mid to late summer. So a third of the way through a vegetable's growth cycle, you up until 4 weeks before frost, you can undersow under tall plants. These obviously are carrots, are not tall plants, but I wanted to have a slide, so that's what I did. So say your corn has a 75 days to maturity. So after it's been growing for 25 days, you can undersow a cover crop under it. It will not compete with the corn. It will be photosynthesizing, feeding the soil, and doing all those benefits we've already talked about. Use it for tomatoes, brassicas, peppers, pole beans, corn, asparagus, etc. So I've got those planted, and then along comes those deep freezes. Looking out my bedroom window, I can see some of my garden beds, and they're all covered with a mulch, and most of it is from a cover crop that died back. So here is a spring. I mean, on the left is an area sown with oats, peas, sorghum, buckwheat. When I pulled the garlic out at the end of July, early August, that I threw that in the next day. Um, it was probably 3 to 4 feet tall by the time it was killed in late October, November. This is what it looked like the following spring, but when this died back, the mulch was probably 10 inches thick or more on the bed. So all winter long, that 10-inch mulch has turned into, like a very light mulch, but it has all winter long protected the bed from erosion, and it's been feeding the soil. These are some of the oats roots, and again, there's the picture of what the soil looked like in that bed. So I got free mulch. I didn't have to put it out on my own labor. It did itself. All I had to do is sow the seeds. So I'm all for it. Anyway, a perennial that I do use, but not a whole lot of, is clover. And I'm just going to skip through this because I see we have only 15 minutes and I really want to have time for discussion. But go back and read this. I use it in paths where I can walk on it. It doesn't hurt it. Fixes nitrogen. Again, the snow melted in April and there was a green. This is an area where I had a lot of clover, not just a path. And it was photosynthesizing before anything else was happening in the garden. And skip the red clover, except to say that here on the left is a root I pulled in April. It has great soil attached to it, but the root I pulled in August has the nodules because in April there wasn't hardly any green above, but in August there was a lot of green plant, and it fixed nitrogen into those nodules. Buckwheat, it's a short season annual. It's really great at scavenging phosphorus and calcium out of the soil. So when you cut it back and let it decompose into the soil, and it's there for the vegetable that you want to plant next into it. It's amazing, beneficial insect and pollinator attractant. That's some seed I saved. Here's some baby ones coming up. I also interplanted it with lettuce because as it got the heat of the summer, the shade of the buckwheat kept it from bolting as soon as it would have. Again, more shots of the buckwheat. And it's very thickly planted here on the left because I wanted to suppress a lot of weeds. But if you give it room to grow, it can become like all of us. If we have room to develop and have the right nutrients, we get to be a big plant. And there's more flowers and mature head. And when I stand near the buckwheat, it's like a symphony of buzzes of hundreds of different creatures that I have no idea who they are, but they're so tiny or huge. Sorghum Sudan grass. It's a midsummer grass, but it looks more like corn. It's a huge biomass. It grows like crazy, and it suppresses root knots, so I often sow it before I put carrots in. And here's what it looks like growing with some buckwheat. The last few years, cover crop cocktails have become the thing to look into, and it's diversity. As in everything in life, the more diverse, the better for us, for the planet. So when you're mixing, you want to pick. I'm focusing on winter kill personally, so I will pick a whole bunch of cover crops seed that will winter kill for my cocktail. And each of them are doing a different thing. Some are pulling up and making bioavailable this nutrient or that nutrient. Another one is doing 2 or 3 different other ones. And so what you're doing by planting as many as possible, you're getting the best possible cocktail for the soil microorganisms and for your planting when you've got it getting around to do it. So how do we take care? What tools do I use? The biggest one for cutting is this little Japanese sickle with serrated teeth. I cut through the soil. I've been using it for about 10 years, and it hasn't gotten dull yet. Under $10 from the Orchard Equipment Supply Company over in Conway, Mass. It's just a phenomenal little tool. Um, and I do a lot of cutting of weeds and cover crops. If you don't have one, make use of what you got. So I'm almost at the end. I just want to do this little sequence of, on the upper left, the seeds are germinating. This bed was planted in April, early May, and was about 3 feet tall when I cut it. Here's the sickle bar cutting at soil level. It is the same crop. I took that picture and then I made this cut. And again, I pulled up some of the pea plant just to see the root nodules. Look at the crumb. Look at the aggregate and worm castings. Then I laid all of the biomass that I had cut on top of the bed, so it's all green again. And then about a week, 10 days later, it's turning brown and decomposing. So it's been a great mulch all this time. I want to plant carrots in this bed, and I found a lot of vole tunnels in it when I was working. So I did use the broad fork to go through the bed to discourage the voles. And there's some of the mulch that was had decomposed. And this is the bed now, all prepped and ready for the carrot seed, though I'm hoping a few weed seeds that have been brought to the surface might germinate. And then I'll solarize it, and in a few days, if it gets sunny, I'll solarize it. When it gets sunny, I'll solarize it, and then a day or two later, I will throw in my carrot seeds. So that's how you do it. If you want to know, if you're somebody who needs to know seeding rates, this is from Cornell. You can look it up. I just kind of guess at it. One quick thing is a few years ago, Northeastern University was doing some soil testing, and I sent in a sample, and they had our organic matter at 15%. And if you know, most farms, if they can get a 5%, they're thrilled. And a 72% potential for sequestering carbon, which just makes my heart so happy. I want to ask you what you will do, but we're not here right now to do that. But maybe you will take a minute and write down something that you have thought of that you might want to implement later this year or next year. And I am leaving this resource up as we open this up now. Anna, can we open up for questions?
Yes, definitely. This was such a wonderful presentation, Sharon. Thank you so much.
Oh, I want to say
go right ahead.
Just that my email address is there at the bottom, and I would be happy to answer questions and stuff that I didn't, because I ran over, because we had those mutes in the beginning. It slowed me down.
No worries, no worries. Also, just to let everyone know that this presentation will be archived and up on NOFA's YouTube page if you'd like to go back and listen to it for yourself. If you have questions, you can either text them to me at 413-214-1237, or you can use the chat feature at the top right-hand corner of your screen to type in questions. Now, I did see a few questions that came through during your presentation, so I'll read a few off to you, Sharon, if that's okay.
Please.
One question in reference to fungi, and this is from the first part of your presentation. How or what is the best way to develop fungi at the root level?
Well, over time, with doing all of these no-till and cover cropping kind of practices, they develop themselves. But a quick way to get a hit going is to get some hardwood wood chips and let them sit around for 6 months or a year, and then you look at them and they're starting to decompose, and you'll see all those white filaments going through it. So those are the fungal mycelium, and then you can take that and move it into your garden. It will disrupt those, it'll disrupt them a little bit, moving them in, but it's kind of like seeding them into the garden, but they will come if you give them the food they want, which is the lignins. When you have a more mature plant, you have the woody stem, um, stalks of things. That's what they love. And if you put it down on the soil, they will come and devour it.
Okay, great. Another viewer question, how does fungi help support overall plant growth?
Well, that's the whole key that a lot of information and research is coming out of. The plant that's photosynthesizing dumps all of that, like 60%, up to 60% of the sugars that it's making in photosynthesis, along with other nutrients into the soil, and the fungal, as well as the bacteria and other microorganisms, then make use of that for their own food as they're decomposing the organic matter in the soil. They also like to have the sugars and the other nutrients and exudates from the plant. So it's kind of like just keeps going round and round in a circle of you feed me, I feed you, you feed me.
Mm-hmm.
Was that the question?
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. It's like a cycle, correct? Okay. Concerning till versus no-till, a question came in. How can untilled soil create this type of environment? And on the till side, if you till, will you still have that same opportunity to create that environment for fungi growth?
Well, let's see. You're going to have to remind me of the first part again in a minute. But if you're tilling, if you think back to that photo of the little pine tree with a huge mass of psyllium under it, when you till or turn that soil in any way, you're breaking those systems up into little pieces, and the perfection of the system is those hyphae mycelium can go great distances from a plant, and when they're long, they're able to go these great distances. So you don't want to break them up because that's where they're communicating, that's where they're transporting the nutrients. So that's the reason not to till. And what was the first part of the question, Anna?
Sure. So in a untilled situation, how is that environment created? So you just spoke about what happens when you till, but then in an untilled situation, to go a little bit more into detail with how that growth is developed.
Okay, so when you're not tilling, you're just layering mulches and organic material on top of the soil. And the soil biology, it takes those materials, decomposes them, and that's what they eat. The carbon is while they're digesting the carbon, they're decomposing it, and they die off. They become food for other microbes, and they die off, and they become food for other bacteria and fungus and things. So what's happening is just it's an amazing system. If you have over 1 billion creatures in a tablespoon or of a teaspoon of soil, you think of all of them living and dying, they're just creating their own habitat, their own life. And so what they're creating is healthy soil. I'm not sure how to describe it any more than that. If you don't mess with it, it's a self-fulfilling system of biology. It's like our human body. If we don't cut off our arm just functions all by itself. It has its own immune system and healing and blood and nerves and muscle and bone. If we leave it alone, it's fine. But when we fall and get hurt and break it, then it has to be healed. And so if we leave our soil alone but keep feeding it by having healthy plants growing and doing photosynthesis, and by using mulch and by not tilling it, then the soil over time just develops into its own creature.
Okay, great. Moving on to cover cropping. In terms of cover cropping, can those roots cut off growth of your regular crops?
So it's kind of like if you go out into the forest, nobody's out there tilling or doing anything, and the trees are all growing, but some trees grow taller and get wider and take over the sun from other ones, and the ones underneath will die off and not do as well. So yeah, we can't have the cover crop towering over the vegetable that we're favoring because that's what we want to eat. So you have to, like if I'm planting out the example I used in the slides with that winter squash, I crimped that cover crop back so it wasn't in competition for sunlight, but its roots were still in the soil. Some of them were still doing photosynthesis, but not at their maximum, but somewhat. And they were becoming food for the soil microorganisms. So you have to use some judgment of giving the plant that you preferred plant room to grow, to have enough sunlight to do the photosynthesis that we want. But that's why if you plant, say, your tomato or your corn, you wait till it's already a third of its growth cycle before you put any cover crop under it. Then you're not going to be competing because it's already the biggest plant in the crop in the space.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that definitely makes sense. That was a great question that came in from a viewer.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, people have said, and I've thought myself, I said, well, like they're competing. Those roots are competing for the nutrients, so I don't want them anywhere near. Get every weed out, just have bare soil because we don't want any competition to my tomato plant. But in actuality, they're not competing. If they're not taking your sunlight directly from that plant, what they're doing is feeding the soil, and then that soil is feeding your tomato plant. So it's a whole mind switch, a different paradigm than I grew up with.
Okay, great. These final two questions, or three, actually, two will be dealing with cover crops that came in from viewers, and then one going back to solarization. So our questions on cover crops, the first question, are there any cover crops that can become invasive, like turn into an invasive species?
I'm sure there are. But as I said, I only choose those that will winter kill. And unless the climate changes drastically and we don't get 2 or 3 20-degree nights, everything I put in, except the clover, will not become invasive. So you have to investigate. Now the clover, some people think that is invasive, and it could be, but you can deal with it. I pull the roots back where I have it in paths, so when they start to grow into the beds. And that big area that I showed the picture of, that I said was, photosynthesizing right after the snow melted. A couple of years after that, I put down cardboard over the whole thing and yet as a different bed, but all that nitrogen is in the soil, and the clover that could have been invasive is gone.
Okay. One viewer has a question concerning are there using cover crops that can be consumed or eaten?
Oh yeah, I forgot that part. Thanks. Those the oats and field peas, I eat a lot of them as pea greens when they're just the little growing tips, and it's not like I'm picking the peas and off my sugar snaps or my growing as vegetables, and so they're really good as a stir fry or in a salad. The oats I use sometimes for tea for myself, but also it's high in, I believe it's high in silicon, and that's I make a tea that I spray back on the plants sometimes out of some of the cover crops.
Mm-hmm.
What other ones do I eat? I don't know. I think that's pretty much what I eat. But the big thing for the Northeast is if somebody could come up with a cover crop that's a perennial, it doesn't grow too tall. It could just be constantly photosynthesizing, except in the winter when it's not. But as soon as the snow melts, it could be there. You'd get rich and you'd be really improving soil a lot.
Okay. And then our final question for the evening, we're going to go back to your slide on solarization. There was a question that came in as to whether or not oculation or solarization may kill off beneficial microorganisms. Is there a fear that that could happen?
Yes, if you leave it on too long in the high heat, you could be killing off, especially ones up in the surface layer of the soil where the soil would overheat. That's why they say if you're on a really hot sunny day, 24 hours should kill off the green plants that you want, but not hurt the microbes. But 48 hours would be maximum that anything I've read, and so that's what I do.
Okay.
With the occultation, no, it's just a perfect environment. It doesn't dry out under there because it's got its own. It's like rains when the moisture in the soil goes up, it hits the plastic or the tarp or whatever, and then it rains back down in and just keeps it nice and moist. And it doesn't overheat. So.
Okay.
No more?
Well, that was our final question for the evening. And thank you so much, Sharon. This was really informative. And I do hope and pray that our viewing and listening audience will go and take advantage of the resources you've provided. If you have any additional questions after our presentation tonight, Sharon's website is at the bottom. Her email, it's sharon@nofamass.org. And just to let you know that NOFA's summer conference is coming up. It's August 11th through the 13th at Hampshire College. You'll get a chance to see Sharon, ask her some more questions in person about her presentation and what she's doing out on her homestead. So I invite everyone to go to our website, nofamass.org, to register. Tonight is the last night for the early bird special, but you can still go on and register after tonight to partake in our workshops. It's going to be an action-packed weekend. If you have additional questions for me, my email again is anna@nofamass.org. Again, we would like to thank everyone for taking the time out. This will be on our YouTube site in a couple of days so that you can view this again. So again, thank you to Sharon. Thank you to everyone for coming out with us tonight, and I hope you have a great evening. Good night.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks, everyone. Hope to hear from you.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Hello.
Hey, Sharon, this is Anna. That was great.
Was it?